Yes, I'm the moderator of this panel, and I would welcome in a few seconds the guest of my panel. So what we did, you maybe saw that little sign in the entrance, which was about generative AI. So in parallel to the DLD that we had here, we co-organized with Steffi together to get all the generative AI experts in Europe together. That was the first time that we ever did that, but it was the research, it was the open source ecosystem, the startups, the institutions and non-for-profit organizations, including some politicians, and discussed what can we do to keep up in Europe with generative AI. Because that obviously is something that we then care about as appliedAI, and it's one of the hot topics. And we heard a couple of talks about the speed of development in AI and how fast it is. And you really can't believe that even if you are in that field, that there is daily new things coming out. And the main question is, what is it that keeps us unique in Europe? What is it that we should do? What's the voice of the European Gen AI ecosystem? And that is what we discussed. And with that, I want to welcome my dear panel guests here on stage. Let's see. There they come. There's one more coming.
Yes, she's coming.
Pegah. So, yeah, we have quite a nice group of people. And overall, we were about 30 now. We had 30, 40 people. We had a few more that joined virtually. And again, we discussed the topic of generative AI and what's up. What's in it for us in Europe? And maybe, Nico, we start with you. We have been working together since quite some time in the Global Partnership on AI really on a global level, and you helped organize this event. So maybe you tell us a little bit about your background, about why you were immediately in when saying, well, we should do that, and maybe you also give a little bit of the insights of Gen AI in Europe overall, and as you're French, maybe also the French perspective on that.
Well, thanks a lot, and thanks for the invitation to Steffi, Yossi, and the entire wonderful DLD team. So my name is Nico. I lead a small non-profit independent think and do tank on AI policy. I'm an AI policy specialist. I've been doing that for 10 years. So I'm one of the pioneers in the field. It's called The Future Society. Why this? It's because it's about nothing less than building the social contracts of the 21st century. We have been, as you said, working in the Global Partnership on AI for quite a while. My work looks like playing policy ping-pong between San Francisco and Brussels via DC, London, and Paris, and to shape the, as smart as possible, cocktails of soft, and hard regulatory mechanisms and their enforcements, including standards, that we need to capture the best from AI in terms of its upsides and minimize its downsides. And as powerful and more powerful AI systems are being developed and deployed, the problem and its magnitude is only growing. Why I immediately jumped on board, where at the Max Planck Institute, back in April, we started discussing the need, is because generative AI as an ecosystem in Europe is at a turning point. We see the very beginning of an industrial revolution where we need to take position in a way that reconcile innovation and the need for safety and robustness. And if we are going, as Europeans, to try and define a techno-industrial base of generative AI that place robustness and safety at the center, which is what we need to deploy the systems across our value chains on aircrafts, in pharmaceuticals, in agriculture, this won't happen without the right incentives. Yes, we need regulation, but regulation itself won't cut it. We need to bring together the communities of practitioners, tool makers, model developers, data set providers, users, and formulate a number of principles and practices. And this is exactly what we've been trying to do today. We don't agree on everything, and that's not the point. But can we agree on most and define a common course that enables us to inject ourselves into the global value chain, to compete with the Americans and with the Chinese, and in so doing, not lead a race to the safety and ethical bottom, but rather the top, and align with our values. This is a great challenge, and I'm glad that we could make a small inch forward today. It is to be continued. And as far as France is concerned, I think that we, the French, represent also what Europeans have to bring, which is the best of research, the best of engineering. If you look at most of the large language models that have been put on the market over the past 2 to 3 years, you'll see around a lot of Germans, a lot of French, not only Swedes and many others, but you'll see a lot of French people. If you look at what Mistral is trying to do right now, Lighton and with people from Lighton today, I think that we are in a great position to position ourselves into that value chain. But again, it won't happen by mistake, and it will not happen by chance. It has to be the result of a design that puts together policy, capital, customers, and that lets innovation flourish in a responsible way. Thank you.
And I must say that in the workshop, there were actually very many French initiatives and experts on that. And you also have a precedent that said, okay, we actually spend €500 million in generative AI to really boost the generative AI ecosystem. And that was a couple of months ago. So there is actually quite a lot of things happening in France. And what we also discussed is a little bit of how that can grow from France to a much more European initiative. So next to you, we have Alex here. And Alex, even though we are here in Munich with 2 excellent universities, and we had just Björn from LMU, and we hear later Reinhard from the TU, you lead the AI center at the ETH Zurich, which is one of the other great AI kind of sources of talents, of research, of excellence in Europe. So we generously kind of counted Switzerland in when we talk about Europe and European AI ecosystems. Maybe you can give a little bit of an insight of what you're doing and also what we maybe discussed about the startup ecosystem and how we can grow kind of through research and through the startups that you actually are responsible for in Zurich.
Good. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. So actually, I spent most of my professional career building startups. I built a computer vision startup, trying to productize something based on data from early first paper prototype to shipping it to millions of consumers. So I think this is also something which is similar what we experience today, that you can sometimes have nice cherry-picked examples, but then if you apply it in your company, then you're kind of disappointed and say, oh, why is it not working here? Why is it not working there? So I think we're really early. For me, the reason to go back to ETH Zurich and start the AI center with others there was very simple. There are 2 big opportunities. So one is basically currently AI has a potential to leverage the interdisciplinary potential. So ETH is, I think, like in 16 disciplines in the top 10, and everywhere is AI. But we have not been able to integrate this yet. So what we have done over the last 3 years is now we have over 110 professors from 16 different departments and 1,400 PhD students. And the opportunity that we have, and I think the same is, of course, in Munich and many other great places in Europe, is that we're producing a lot of talent that can actually shape something. And this is what gets me excited about the AI space right now, that the companies that are upsetting our current world, they were actually small and medium enterprises, SMEs. OpenAI, I think, at the beginning of this year, 300, 400 employees, and was making a company like Google with 150,000 people sweat. So this is the time where we're in and where I'm super excited. And so we try to find a good combination of what can we do cutting-edge research, because there are many problems not solved in AI, and at the same time, how can we accelerate this to create more startups? And I think this gets me excited. And next year, we're getting one of the best supercomputers in Europe, which we also want to use for startup support as well. So not just the research, but also the translation to this. And this is why I'm very interested also in this conversation, because Switzerland is a very small country. So this is not sufficient. So we always need to think global. And Europe has the opportunity to become one of the most significant markets for AI, to create and also to consume AI, obviously.
Can you give a little bit of an insight of what we discussed? Because, I mean, you had Jonas here on stage today, so he was obviously also joining us. There was one of the experts in that field, one of the founders of Flighton. There were quite a few other startups there. So we had the startup ecosystem from Europe in that room over there. What's the feeling of the startups, of the startup ecosystem when we talk about AI? Maybe you give a little bit of a summary of what we discussed.
Yeah, I think on the one hand side, the discussion on regulation is important because if it's done right, it helps to eliminate uncertainties. And at the moment, there are many uncertainties, and uncertainty kills business. So this is something like one of the parts. And then, of course, it also needs to be lightweight, that startups have a chance and not just the big companies. And yeah, the second part is really around what can be done to collaborate across, so to make sure the models are multilingual and adapting to the different regions, because language is just a mirror of our culture, as you might have heard as well. So if we're not making sure that the language and the culture from the different region is reflected in, then over time we are eroding this also to an extent. And I think this is the opportunity that we also have to work together. And there have been some discussions on open source versus not open source, what are the opportunities and risks. For me, the main part is we need to increase the supply of talent. Currently, there are areas where we have maybe 300 people on the planet that know how to build this really large model with more than 50 billion parameters. And as long as we don't increase the supply of those people, then we're stuck. And we can only do it if we have the compute and if we have the open source initiatives that people can work on.
And I think it was also quite interesting to see, because we also discussed it, do we need a European OpenAI? Do we need really something substantial in Europe? And the idea was, well, we can actually do quite a bit with 10, 20, 30 people teams. It's about the resources, about the hardware, the infrastructure. We'll come to that later. But it's a disruptive technology, and that can grow. And let's focus first on that early steps of innovation and get things out and build the great startups. And then let's do everything that we keep those startups here. I think that is what we also want to focus on. And we touched a little bit the topic on regulation. And Pegah, you are from the Stiftung Neue Verantwortung, and obviously you care about trustworthiness, about regulation. Maybe you can give a little bit about insights about your work, what you're doing there, and maybe also summarize the topic a little bit for us.
Sure. My name is Pegah, and I lead the AI project at Stiftung Neue Verantwortung, which is an emerging tech think tank in Berlin. And in the AI program, we both look at, okay, how can we make sure the European AI ecosystem is strong? Talent, for example, we have an analysis on this. But we also look at what can be rules and practices to make sure that this technology, in the end, benefits society and all of us, and not just few. So these are the different things. And so it was quite interesting to also hear about the trustworthiness debates. And I think there was a huge agreement that trustworthiness is important and necessary, and can, for Europe, be a differentiator towards, for example, other AI companies in the world, especially because we looked at what kind of industries are over here in Europe. If you look at aerospace, automotive, health industry, these are all industries where you need robust and reliable AI. It's very different from some other sectors. So this can be a competitive advantage to innovate with regard to trustworthiness and robustness. But there was also, as people said, it should not hinder innovation, and there's definitely a need for benchmarks and evaluation. So these are the things that are used to actually measure the quality of an AI model, and not just in English, but hopefully also in many other European languages, which it's currently lacking and missing. And so this can also be something where Europe can be the innovator, actually, and so regulation actually works hand in hand with staying competitive. Maybe one more thing, the whole field is moving very quickly. I think we all agreed on this. And so we need some flexibility in the regulation. And we also need lots of understanding and skill on the regulatory side of things to make sure to stay adaptive in this very fast moving field. And lastly, the question also is, where does the burden go? So we have a lot of SMEs in Europe. They shouldn't be burdened too much. It should be the big players who are providing this resource, the foundation models that were talked about, should also be made sure to comply with our values and our rights here in Europe.
Cool, thank you. And then we have Daniel, and you're from Sweden. And I think what you did as a country is to build a very large language model on Nordic languages. I think that was very visionary at the one side, but then you kind of also open sourced it, you followed up with that. So maybe you can tell a little bit about the models that you developed in Sweden, and you were also then the advocate in that whole group and saying, okay, we need to get things done. We need to build, we need to get active. Maybe you give a little bit of that kind of overview to the group here of what we discussed on that topic.
Absolutely. So yeah, in Sweden, a few years ago, we basically saw the writing on the wall that these kinds of generative AI models, yeah, they will be important one way or another. They will open up new avenues for building new applications, for doing stuff with unstructured data that we just couldn't do before. So we just decided that, yeah, okay, we need to build something. Because Swedish is a small language. It's not necessarily so that a very large company from the US will take full responsibility for the Swedish language. Not necessarily also our industrial partners and so on, because in all honesty, a lot of stuff done in large internationals in Sweden, the company language is English. The drive to actually understand and build applications in Swedish is pretty strong from the public sector, from governance, from the citizen perspective. So we basically took the chance of, yeah, this will be important. Let's see if we can do it, and let's see if we also can take a little bit more of a, let's say, citizen-driven perspective. So some of the things that's been important within this development is, of course, transparency on where we get data and things like that. Let's be open. It's not going to be perfect. We know that, but let's at least be open about where it comes from, how we have trained the model, what it contains, etc., etc. And let's also make sure, and this might have been a little bit controversial, but basically a lot of the angry calls about what we were doing, they stopped when ChatGPT was released, so we're in a much better situation now. But if you really want to represent Swedish citizens, you need to be able to represent everyone. That comes from parts of society that have a different tone, a different way of using language, etc., etc. With that kind of data comes a certain number of possible problems, but it's not like we want this kind of foundation models, if we put it to use in healthcare, to not understand these people. So there are a lot of, deliberate and difficult decisions that we need to make if we take this non-commercial view of a large language model. And by now I'm quite happy that we did, because we've learned a lot, and I think we can readily scale this up on not only a Nordic language level, but on a European level, basically.
And you moved into that open sourcing of that. I think that is also interesting. I mean, we have been in touch since quite some time, and I mean, you told me that it was actually quite some discussion if you open source this or not, and how you can do it with the data that you use and so on. So maybe you can say a little bit about that.
Yeah, and to be perfectly honest, the model is not fully without restrictions yet. It's it's within a release where you, as a user, you can use it, but you need to take responsibility for some things. So it's not complete open source like that. And we did that because of taking responsibility. Do we find something super problematic during the first limited release? Okay, we're going to back off and try to do something differently. So to get some feedback to start with, basically. But we can see that a lot of the applications that we need to make sure that they exist, they're very, very difficult to build on top of a service model. There are Swedish hospitals that cannot send data outside of the hospital at all. That's not going to change. There are other critical applications within Swedish security, etc., that need this kind of license and ways of working. So we do think it's the right way, and we do think it's super important that these types of open source models are available. It's not necessarily to outcompete GPT-4, because we're not going to do that, but for a certain type of applications, this is going to be necessary.
How was the kind of uptake and acceptance of these types of models?
I think it's been pretty good so far, although I must also say that just the fact that we built something, even if it's, and I think I might have said earlier in the discussion, even if it's not actually used by anyone in Sweden, if it's not, put into use anywhere, the small investment that we did, we only have a team of a handful of people actually building this. So you can actually do some of these things at scale with a handful of people. But the kind of awareness it created, the kind of basically push for a lot of organizations to think about, so what are the fundamental use cases and how will it transform healthcare, how will it transform our business, etc., etc. It's worth it without actually getting the model into use. But it is being in test use in many cases.
Because I think that was one of the main discussions that we also had. How much open source is the European approach, and how much is it with single startups or large organizations that do that? So that is, I think, an ongoing discussion. So having these types of feedbacks and experiences from these countries are really, really important.
So maybe just to add, one observation that also came up, that of course now many companies, many industries are looking for, hey, let's build a specific foundation model for health, for manufacturing, and so on. And this is obviously a big opportunity as well, where you say, like, okay, if multiple companies team up, it can learn from the data, so we don't need to necessarily publish all of the data, but the training process is transparent, it has there. And also, it's very clear what is in the base model, then you also get the performance out of it. Practically, you see it today, that the current models, GPT-4 and so on, they're very, very good at coding, because there's a lot of coding in the base model already, and then in the fine-tuning, you get this out. So if you want to go into different areas, and that's a big opportunity where basically the different companies and research institutions can work together already now to pool resources instead of keeping it isolated.
Maybe one important reason why we need to articulate the argument over how and why it is difficult to build robust AI models is because of the underlying techno-scientific cocktails. What we have in front of us is immensely complicated and big statistical models that operate in a way that we cannot predict and fully understand. And therefore, robustifying them, understanding the input and the output is extremely difficult and remains extremely difficult. And as we grow the number of billions of parameters and trillions of tokens that we feed this model in, is it like fully explainable engineering? Not at all. And so we have to look at how we approach the design stage, the building blocks, including the data sets, and the output in a way which is humble. And how can open access, open source, or closed access, or gated access, or closed source help or go against that is still a matter of debate, because do we want powerful model that we don't control and that can exhibit powerful and dangerous capacities to be open source and proliferate everywhere and everywhere? Not necessarily. But do we need these models to be accessible to and more transparent for people to research, to try and jailbreak them, to make them stronger if we don't understand them? Yes, we need that. What middle ground do we strike? How do we strike it? And where do we draw the line in terms of the regulation versus standards is exactly the kind of thing that we were trying to hit today and that are hard to hit. And under a context of an extremely fast and capital-intensive race where we, the Europeans, do not master most of the means of production, starting with compute.
But I think also one thing, because you say it's a capital-intensive race, yeah? So if this is a technology that makes you 10 times more efficient, now we see that proof on coding because it's in there, then there are a number of other technologies where there has been a lot more money spent on this. So that's why I'm also not really sure, like the value that you can get out of AI versus the investment. So the investment, I would argue, is still relatively small. We talk about a few billions, but look at other technologies and the output there. So I think this is much, much faster to application and impact for every citizen. So this is sometimes a little bit surprising to me. I don't know if you have an answer on this.
I still see that when we collectively jump on our seats, because we see one French startup scale up or one German scale up that has raised $100 million and is going to be capable to enter in the race, the Americans are looking at this and saying, sorry, we just raised $1 billion. So when I say that's capital intensive, from the compute, from the talent and talent retention as well, look at the salaries. Look at the salaries. So I think that It's the question of the Europeans catching up with their ability to mobilize the capital is going to remain a big problem. We can be smart about this, and we should be smart about this, for sure, but to me it's not, unfortunately, a problem that we can put on the side.
Yeah, but the salaries are so high because there are not enough people.
Scarcity,
so if we would increase the supply, then I think that would also change a little bit.
Yeah.
So as we already come kind of to the end of our session, that was really the type of discussions that we had. That is really with people and the ecosystem on the generative AI field in Europe. It's a main question of what is that approach? How deep go we in with collaboration? How much we kind of center around the single ones? Maybe what do you take out of that meeting today? Are you going back and say, well, we actually stand a chance in Europe? Or you say, well, that was actually a little bit disappointing. So what's your feeling?
I think there was a huge debate around where is the value actually created? Where is the impact being made? Is it the foundation models that currently are very centralized? Or will it be the application layer? What the problems I can solve with this, that I can only solve if I know the customer, if I know the use case, if I actually have the proprietary data to fine-tune my model on. And I think Europe has a lot of unique benefits and advantages here to innovate in that space. And I think that's a huge advantage that we should also not forget in our focus and our panic that, oh no, we don't have a European ChatGPT, but we have so much more. And we can like maybe say, okay, maybe for the next years, maybe we won't have a European GPT, and we need to think about the strategies, but we will actually create value with this model. We will actually make sure that industry can use it, that applications can use it, and then in the long run, we can also, so many discussions, you already pointed to them, we can think of strategies, okay, how do we make sure we stay sovereign and have our own basic technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Europe still has a position. It's the race is definitely not over, but things are moving very fast. I really do think that, yes, we need to start building some of these foundation models at scale to actually make sure that we can build the rest of the applications, the rest of the solutions, study the consequences, the work that we need to put in to actually innovate on top of this stuff. We need to get that started really, really quickly. And I'm not as worried, perhaps. Of course, we want the models to be trustworthy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I already know about transformative applications that do not necessarily take... I mean, we can work with the type of models that we have. Let's not let perfect be the enemy of actually getting something out of the door here and actually start innovating on top of it.
Maybe one point also from the Swedish side. You also have the Wallenberg family that spends a lot of money in AI. Yeah. Is that helpful? Is it the government who needs to push it, like in France? Or how do you see that support also from individuals, from families that really push and advance that field? And is it necessary?
Yeah, I think especially in terms of compute and some of these resources and so on, yeah, we need a very large investment. But I think what we've basically proven is that you can do a lot of the actual model development work and so on with a relatively small team that can scale really, really quickly. And we're not going to, at a full European level, perhaps build a lot of GPT-4 services, but we are going to build the foundation models that some of these services can be built upon, that services within companies and so on can be built upon. And these are different levels of engagement and need for personnel and investment.
So there are some opportunities, there are some ways of a European generative AI approach. We are at the start of that, but it's quite a long way to go, and hardware is the key. It's actually the access to GPUs that we need.
And talent.
And
yes,
talent.
Great point.
Thank you.